The rope bit into Lieutenant Kylie Parker's wrists as they cinched it tighter, the coarse fibers scraping against skin already raw from struggling. They'd used good technique, she had to give them that. Hands behind her back, arms secured to the metal chair with multiple wraps, ankles bound separately to the chair legs. Professional work. The kind that came from training or experience, not improvisation. "Comfortable?" Captain Marcus Webb asked, circling her like a shark that had finally cornered its prey. His voice carried the smug satisfaction of someone who thought he'd won. Behind him, 3 more men stood watch. Sergeant Dakota Mills leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, Corporal Jason Reeves checking his weapon by the door, and Lieutenant Frank Torres monitoring the surveillance feeds that showed empty corridors outside this forgotten storage room deep in Fort Bragg's oldest section. Kylie said nothing, just kept her breathing steady and her eyes down. Let them think she was scared. Let them think the ropes meant something. Let them make the critical mistake of believing that binding a Special Forces operator actually made her helpless. Because in about 4 minutes, when the shift change created a 30-second gap in the base's security protocol, these 4 men were going to learn a lesson that would haunt them for the rest of their considerably shortened military careers. But before we show you what happens when highly trained soldiers forget that some people are only as trapped as they choose to be, make sure you're subscribed and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Because what's about to unfold in this room will become a case study in why underestimating quiet professionals is the last mistake you ever make. The mission had seemed straightforward when Colonel Patricia Harrison briefed Kylie 72 hours earlier in a windowless room at DIA headquarters. A weapons cache had gone missing from Fort Bragg's armory. Not small arms or ammunition that could be explained by poor inventory practices, but serious hardware. Anti-tank missiles, C4 explosives, detonators, the kind of equipment that could level buildings or take down aircraft. The kind of equipment that, in the wrong hands, could kill hundreds of Americans. "We believe it's an inside job," Colonel Harrison had said, sliding photos across the table. "Someone with access and authority. Someone who knows our security protocols well enough to circumvent them. We need you to infiltrate, identify the responsible parties, and secure evidence for prosecution." Kylie had studied the photos. Fort Bragg was one of the largest military installations in the world, home to special forces, airborne units, and thousands of soldiers. Finding a traitor there was like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. Cover identity? Supply officer, temporary assignment, routine audit. You'll have 30 days before anyone questions why you're still there. After that, your effectiveness drops to 0. "I'll need 20, Kylie had replied, not from arrogance but from experience. 20 days was her average for infiltration operations. Get in, identify targets, gather evidence, get out. Clean, professional, no drama. Except this operation had gone sideways on day 18 when she'd gotten too close to the truth. Captain Webb wasn't just stealing weapons. He was running an entire smuggling operation, selling military hardware to the highest bidder through a network of corrupt soldiers and civilian contractors. The missing cash was just the latest shipment, already sold and waiting for transport. And Kylie had made the mistake of being in the wrong place at the right time, photographing Webb's meeting with a known arms dealer behind the motor pool at 0200 hours. She'd been careful, staying in shadows, using equipment that didn't produce visible light or sound. But she hadn't accounted for thermal imaging, for the possibility that they'd been expecting surveillance. Mills had grabbed her from behind before she could react, big arms wrapping around her chest and lifting her off her feet. Reeves had stripped her camera and phone while Torres secured her wrists with flex cuffs. Professional, coordinated, clearly rehearsed. They'd bundled her into a vehicle, driven her to this abandoned storage facility, and transferred her to the chair where she now sat, bound with rope instead of plastic, because Webb was old school and believed rope was more reliable. He wasn't wrong, technically. Rope was harder to break than flex cuffs, more resistant to the kind of techniques that could snap plastic. But rope had other properties, other weaknesses that could be exploited by someone who knew what they were doing. "You've been asking a lot of questions, Lieutenant Parker," Webb said, still circling. He'd removed his jacket, rolled up his sleeves, the posture of someone preparing for physical work. Questions about inventory discrepancies, about transport schedules, about personnel with armory access made us nervous, made us wonder if you were really just a supply officer or something else entirely. Kylie kept her eyes down, projecting defeat. Her mind, though, was racing through calculations. 4 hostiles, all armed. Webb carried a Beretta M9 in a hip holster, safety probably on based on the way he moved. Mills had a knife clipped to his belt, right-handed draw, probably his preferred weapon for close work. Reeves held an M4 rifle at low ready, finger off the trigger but close enough to matter. Torres was unarmed except for a sidearm, more focused on the surveillance screens than on her. The room itself was maybe 20 feet square, concrete floor and walls, single door with a heavy lock, no windows. 2 overhead lights, one flickering slightly. Metal shelving along one wall held forgotten supplies, paint cans and cleaning equipment. A workbench in the corner with tools scattered across its surface. Old facility, probably scheduled for demolition, which is why they'd chosen it. No foot traffic, no witnesses, no interruptions. Got nothing to say? Webb crouched in front of her, forcing eye contact. That's fine. We've got time. Plenty of time to figure out who you really are and who you've been talking to. This close, Kylie could smell his cologne mixed with sweat and the metallic tang of gun oil. She could see the slight tremor in his hands, adrenaline or nerves, probably both. He was scared, she realized. Scared of exposure, scared of prison, scared of what would happen if his operation unraveled. Fear made people dangerous, but it also made them stupid. I'm just a supply officer, Kylie said quietly, playing the role. I was conducting inventory audits like I was ordered. I don't know what you think I saw, but... Bullshit, Webb cut her off. Supply officers don't conduct surveillance at 0200. They don't use military-grade cameras with telephoto lenses. They don't photograph classified meetings. He stood, started pacing. Your DIA or CID probably sent here specifically to investigate us, which means you've already reported in, which means we're compromised. I haven't reported anything, Kylie lied smoothly. I was gathering information first, making sure I had something concrete before contacting my superiors. You grabbed me before I could transmit. It was a calculated gamble, giving them hope that the investigation was contained, that eliminating her would solve their problem. Desperate men clung to hope like drowning men clung to debris. If she could convince them she was their only problem, they might get careless. Webb studied her, weighing her words against his paranoia. Even if that's true, you disappear and someone will come looking. Not for weeks. I'm operating solo, checking in every 15 days. My next report isn't due until... She paused, pretending to calculate. 9 days from now. That's a lot of time to clean up your operation and disappear. She watched the idea take root. Mills and Reeves exchanged glances. Torres stopped watching the monitors to listen. They wanted to believe her because the alternative was too terrible. If the investigation was already in motion, if evidence had already been transmitted, they were finished. But if she was their only problem, they still had options. We need to verify that, Torres said from his position by the screens. Check her phone, her communications, see if she's transmitted anything. Already on it, Reeves replied, pulling out Kylie's phone. He powered it on, started scrolling through messages and call logs. His face relaxed slightly. Last transmission was 2 days ago, routine check-in. Nothing about surveillance or the weapons investigation. Nothing recent at all. Another lie. Kylie had a second phone, securely hidden in a location these amateurs would never think to check, that had transmitted full reports including Webb's identity and operation details to DIA every 6 hours. But they didn't need to know that. They needed to believe they still had control. So we've got 9 days, Mills said, straightening from the wall. What do we do with her? We make her disappear, Webb said flatly. Training accident, vehicle rollover, something that explains a body without raising questions. Happens all the time on military bases. That's murder, Torres said, and there was uncertainty in his voice. That's a line. We crossed the line when we started selling military weapons to criminals, Webb snapped. This is just damage control. She came here to destroy our lives, to send us to Leavenworth for the next 30 years. I'm not going to prison because some DIA operator got nosy. Kylie listened to them debate her murder with detached interest. She'd been in worse situations, had been captured by actual enemy forces in Syria, had escaped from a Taliban compound in Afghanistan, had survived a Russian intelligence officer's interrogation in Ukraine. 4 scared soldiers in a storage room were manageable. She tested the ropes while they argued, subtle movements hidden by natural fidgeting. Her wrists had some circulation, which was good. The knots were tight but conventional, probably something Webb learned in basic training decades ago. The chair was old metal, sturdy but not reinforced. Her ankles had even more freedom than her wrists. Most importantly, they'd made a critical error. They'd tied her hands behind her back with her wrists crossed, which actually gave her more range of motion than if they'd bound them parallel. It was a common mistake, seen in movies and TV, but wrong for actual prisoner restraint. Wrong in a way that someone with her training could exploit. "We're wasting time," Reeves said, checking his watch. "Shift change happens in 5 minutes. We need to move her before the next patrol comes through this sector." "Where?" Mills asked. "Training range on the eastern perimeter," Webb decided. "We stage an accident with one of the vehicles." She was driving too fast on a training exercise, lost control, vehicle rolled, body burns in the fire, clean, simple, no questions. And if someone asks why she was on a training exercise at 0300, we say she was conducting night inventory checks, got disoriented, panicked. Supply officers aren't tactical. It's believable. They were amateurs, Kylie thought, making amateur mistakes. But amateur mistakes could still kill you if you weren't careful. She needed to move soon, before they relocated her to the training range where they'd have more space and fewer constraints. "All right," Webb said, coming to a decision. "Mills, Reeves, get her ready for transport. Torres, kill those surveillance feeds. I don't want any record of us moving through the base tonight." Torres moved to the control panel, started shutting down cameras. Mills and Reeves approached Kylie's chair, Mills pulling out a black hood. "Don't make this difficult," he said, not unkindly. "Fight and we'll just hurt you worse." This was it. Her window. The moment when their attention was divided, through when they thought she was contained, when they stopped treating her like a threat and started treating her like cargo. Kylie exploded into motion. Her legs bounded the chair, but with enough flexibility to generate force, drove upward, lifting the chair's front legs off the ground. She threw her weight forward, turning the chair into a battering ram that caught Mills in the chest. He stumbled backward, surprise flashing across his face, arms windmilling for balance. Simultaneously, Kylie's hands, which had been working the rope knots for the past 5 minutes using micro-movements and friction, found the leverage point she'd been seeking. The rope wasn't actually that secure if you knew human anatomy, knew how to rotate your wrists to create space, knew how to use your thumbs as fulcrums to generate pressure against specific points in the knot. The rope loosened. Not completely, but enough. She threw her weight sideways, the chair tilting, crashing to the concrete floor with her still attached. The impact jarred her shoulder, sent pain shooting through her side, but she'd positioned herself deliberately. The chair's fall angled her toward the workbench, toward the scattered tools she'd cataloged earlier. Reeves was already moving, weapon coming up, but he hesitated. Training said, "Don't shoot friendlies." And Mills was directly in his line of fire, still stumbling backward from the chair impact. That hesitation cost him precious seconds. Kylie's partially freed hands found the chair's metal frame, gripped, pulled. The old bolts holding the backrest to the seat were corroded, weakened by decades of moisture exposure. They gave with a metallic screech, and suddenly she had one arm completely free, the rope trailing behind her, but no longer securing her to the chair. "She's loose!" Torres shouted, abandoning the surveillance panel, reaching for his sidearm. Kylie rolled, the chair still attached to her lower body by the ankle ropes, but her upper body mobile. Her free hand shot out, grabbed a paint can from the fallen shelving, hurled it at Reeves. He ducked instinctively, weapon tracking down, buying her another second. She used that second to reach the workbench, to grab the screwdriver lying among the scattered tools, to cut through the rope binding her other wrist with savage efficiency. The screwdriver wasn't designed for cutting, but pressure plus sawing motion plus desperation equaled freedom. Her hands were free. Mills recovered, charging forward with his knife drawn, big, strong, angry, but telegraphing his attack with body language that might as well have been neon signs. Kylie waited until he committed, until his weight was forward and his balance compromised, then moved. She swept his knife hand aside with her left arm, redirecting the blade past her body, while her right hand drove the screwdriver toward his face. Not to kill, she didn't need bodies, just to disable. The screwdriver's handle caught him in the temple with precisely calculated force. His eyes rolled back, and he dropped like someone had cut his strings. One down. Reeves had his weapon up now, safety off, finger on the trigger. "Don't move!" he barked, voice high with adrenaline. "Don't fucking move!" Kylie froze, hands visible, still attached to the overturned chair by her ankle ropes. She was mobile but constrained, armed with a screwdriver against rifles and pistols. The math wasn't good for a frontal assault. "Smart girl," Webb said, drawing his Beretta, moving to flank her while Reeves maintained forward pressure. "Impressive escape attempt, really. But you're still outnumbered and outgunned. Now we do this the hard way." "The hard way for who?" Kylie asked, buying seconds while her mind raced through options. The chair was still attached to her ankles, limiting mobility. 3 armed hostiles with angles on her position. Door was locked and probably required a key she didn't have. Workbench behind her offered minimal cover. The situation had gone from bad to worse, except for one critical detail they'd overlooked. When Torres shut down the surveillance system, he'd killed the cameras that showed empty corridors outside. But he'd also killed the alert system that would notify them if those corridors stopped being empty. And right now, according to the schedule Kylie had memorized during her 3 weeks on base, the MP patrol was making its rounds through this sector. She just needed to get them here, needed to create enough noise that someone would investigate. "Don't do anything stupid," Torres warned, his pistol trained on her center mass. "We can still make this look like an accident. Fight us, and it becomes a shootout. Self-defense. Your choice." Kylie smiled, cold and predatory. "You're right. It is my choice." She grabbed the overturned chair still attached to her ankles, used it as leverage to sweep Reeves's legs. He went down hard, weapon discharging into the ceiling with a thunderous crack that echoed like a bomb in the confined space. Before the echo faded, Kylie was moving. She kicked backward, chair and all, catching Torres in the knee. He stumbled, weapon dropping from nerveless fingers. She rolled forward, hands finding Mills's dropped knife, cutting through the ankle ropes with desperate speed. Webb fired. The round punched through the space where her head had been a heartbeat earlier, impacted concrete, ricocheted. Kylie finished cutting the ropes, kicked free of the chair, and dove behind the workbench as 2 more shots rang out. "You can't win this!" Webb shouted, voice cracking. "There's nowhere to go!" He was right about that. The door was still locked, the room was a concrete box, and now they were firing live ammunition in an enclosed space. But Kylie didn't need to win. She just needed to survive until the sound of gunfire brought the MPs running. She grabbed a hammer from the workbench, tested its weight. Not her first choice of weapons, but better than nothing. Reeves was getting to his feet, dazed but recovering, weapon coming back up. Torres had retrieved his pistol, was moving to flank. Webb held position by the door, blocking the exit. Professional tactics, competent execution. Under normal circumstances, 3 armed soldiers should easily neutralize 1 unarmed operator trapped in a small room. These weren't normal circumstances, and Kylie Parker wasn't an ordinary operator. She'd trained with Delta Force, operated with CIA Special Activities Division, survived combat in 7 different countries against enemies who made these men look like children playing soldier. She'd been bound, interrogated, and tortured by professionals. She'd escaped from situations that should have been impossible. And she was done playing defense. Kylie moved, not toward cover or away from the threats, but directly at them. The hammer left her hand in a flat trajectory, tumbling end over end, catching Reeves in the collarbone with enough force to shatter bone. He screamed, dropped his weapon, went down clutching his shoulder. 2 down. Torres fired 3 times, but Kylie was already moving, already inside his decision loop. She closed the distance before he could adjust, hand wrapping around his gun wrist, redirecting his aim toward the ceiling while her knee drove into his solar plexus. Air exploded from his lungs, face turning purple, weapon falling. She stripped the pistol from his hand, stepped back, and leveled it at Webb. "Drop it," she ordered, voice calm despite her elevated heart rate. "Now." Webb stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time. Seeing past the supply officer cover, past the bound prisoner, seeing the predator that had been hiding in plain sight. His hand trembled, but he didn't drop the weapon. "You'll never make it out of this base," he said, trying for defiance but landing on desperation. "Even if you shoot me, even if you escape this room, my network will find you. We have people everywhere, members of parliament, officers, contractors. You're alone." "I'm never alone," Kylie replied. And right on cue, as if she'd scripted it, boots thundered in the corridor outside. Shouts of "military police" and "open this door" confirmed what she'd been counting on. The gunfire had done its job. Webb's face went pale. He looked at the door, at Kylie, at his men on the floor, calculating odds that were suddenly impossible. Then, faster than she expected, he raised his pistol. Kylie didn't hesitate. Her shot took him in the shoulder, precise and controlled, dropping him without killing him. He hit the floor, cursing, weapon clattering away, blood spreading across his uniform. "Federal agent!" Kylie shouted toward the door as the pounding intensified. "I'm armed but friendly." 3 hostiles neutralized, 1 wounded. The door exploded inward, breached by MPs with weapons drawn and tactics tight. They flooded the room, covering angles, securing threats, professional and efficient. Kylie placed Torres's pistol on the ground, raised her hands and stood perfectly still while they assessed the situation. "Lieutenant Parker, DIA," she identified herself. "I have evidence of weapons trafficking involving Captain Webb and his associates. I need to contact Colonel Patricia Harrison immediately." The lead MP, a sergeant with hard eyes and a harder demeanor, took in the scene. 3 men down, 1 woman standing, rope and overturned chairs, bullet holes in the ceiling and walls. His eyes lingered on the raw rope burns around Kylie's wrists, the bruises already forming on her arms. "Looks like you had a rough night, ma'am," he said, lowering his weapon. "I've had worse," Kylie replied, and she meant it. 4 hours later, Kylie sat in Colonel Harrison's temporary office at Fort Bragg, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm evening, sipping coffee that tasted like battery acid, but contained enough caffeine to keep her functional. Her wrists were bandaged, a medic had checked her for concussion, and she'd given a preliminary statement to CID investigators who were still processing the scene. "Webb and his crew are in custody," Colonel Harrison said, reviewing reports on her tablet. "We've identified 8 more soldiers involved in the trafficking network, plus a dozen civilian contractors. The weapons cache has been recovered from a warehouse in Fayetteville. You did good work, Lieutenant." "They underestimated me," Kylie said simply. "Thought rope and numbers meant they had control. Forgot that Special Forces operators are trained specifically for situations where control is an illusion. They also forgot that binding someone doesn't mean you've beaten them." Harrison set down her tablet, looked at Kylie with something approaching respect. "I read the MPS report. You were tied to a chair in a locked room with 4 armed hostiles. By the time backup arrived, 3 were neutralized and the 4th was begging for medical attention." "How?" Kylie smiled, tired but genuine. "Because they thought capturing me was the hard part. Thought once I was bound, the threat was over. They didn't understand that for people like us, being captured is just another tactical situation requiring a solution." "And rope?" She held up her bandaged wrists. "Rope is just fiber. Fiber can be manipulated, exploited, broken. It's not the restraint that matters. It's what the person being restrained knows how to do despite it." "Remind me never to try capturing you," Harrison said with dark humor. "I'd recommend not trying to capture any Special Forces operator, ma'am. We're trained to escape, evade, and eliminate threats even when the odds look impossible. It's kind of our specialty." Harrison nodded slowly. "Rest up, Lieutenant. You've got 48 hours of mandatory downtime. Then we have another assignment that requires your particular skill set." "Another infiltration?" "Something like that. We'll brief you when you're recovered." Harrison stood, extended her hand. "And Parker? The men who tried to kill you tonight? They're going to spend a very long time in military prison thinking about their mistakes. The biggest one being that they thought tying you up meant they'd won." Kylie shook her hand, grip firm despite the bandages. That's always the biggest mistake, ma'am. Thinking restraints matter more than resolve. Thinking rope is stronger than training. Thinking capture means defeat. She finished her terrible coffee, set the cup down with finality. They learned different. Most people do eventually, usually right before everything they thought they knew about control gets proven very, very wrong. She walked out into the Fort Bragg night, breathing free air, wrists aching but spirit unbroken. The base stretched out before her, quiet now in the pre-dawn hours, lights glowing from windows where soldiers prepared for another day of duty. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the rhythmic cadence of morning PT, the familiar sounds of military life continuing as it always did, unaware of the violence that had unfolded in the shadows. Behind her, in that forgotten storage room, investigators were still cataloging evidence of her escape. The cut ropes, the improvised weapons, the blood and bullet holes that told the story of what happened when soldiers forgot that Special Forces operators were never as helpless as they looked. Crime scene techs photographed every angle, measured every bloodstain, documented the physics of violence that had transformed a prisoner into a predator in the span of heartbeats. The lead investigator, a seasoned CID agent who'd seen 3 decades of military crime scenes, stood in the center of the room shaking his head. 4 against 1, he muttered to his partner. 4 armed men against 1 bound woman, and she walked out while they got carried out on stretchers. How does that even happen? His partner, younger but equally experienced, examined the chair where Kylie had been bound. The metal frame was bent, the backrest completely separated from the seat, rope fibers embedded in the bolts. Training, he said simply. Real training. The kind that turns impossible situations into Tuesday afternoons. Look at this. He pointed to the rope burns on the chair's arms. She worked these knots for probably 10 minutes while they talked, using micro-movements they couldn't see. By the time they thought she was secured, she was already halfway free. Still, 4 trained soldiers with weapons. 4 corrupt soldiers who forgot what they were dealing with. Special Activities Division doesn't send office workers, Tom. They send people who've survived worse than a storage room in North Carolina. People who've been captured by actual enemies in actual war zones and still made it home. This? He gestured around the room. This was probably easier than half her training exercises. And somewhere in the MP station, Captain Marcus Webb sat in a cell with his wounded shoulder throbbing, replaying the moment when his bound prisoner became his worst nightmare. The moment when rope that had seemed so secure suddenly became meaningless. The moment when her eyes had lifted and he'd seen something in them that made his blood run cold. Not fear or desperation, but cold calculation and absolute confidence. He'd been in combat, had commanded soldiers in firefights, had faced down enemies who wanted him dead. But he'd never seen anything like what Kylie Parker had become when she decided captivity was over. It was like watching a switch flip, transforming a helpless prisoner into something primal and unstoppable. Every movement had been precise, purposeful, devastating. She hadn't fought with anger or panic. She'd fought with the clinical efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor, and they had been the disease she was excising. Mills, in the cell next to him with his concussion and broken collarbone, kept muttering the same thing over and over. She was tied up. She was tied up. How did she? His voice trailed off, lost in the impossibility of what he'd witnessed. Reeves sat in medical with armed guards, his shattered collarbone pinned and plated, trying to explain to investigators how a bound woman had disarmed 3 trained soldiers. She moved like water, he said, searching for words to describe something beyond his experience. Like she knew what we were going to do before we did it. Like the ropes didn't matter, the chair didn't matter, the weapons didn't matter. Like she was just waiting for permission to stop pretending she was trapped. Torres, nursing bruised ribs and a damaged ego, was more succinct. "We fucked up," he told the CID investigator. "We thought we caught her. But you can't catch someone like that. You can only make them decide whether killing you is worth the paperwork." Wondering how it had gone so wrong, never quite understanding that for operators like Kylie Parker, being trapped was just another word for having targets exactly where you wanted them. That rope burns were just the cost of doing business. That pain was temporary, but training was permanent. That special forces didn't create soldiers who gave up when things got hard. They created soldiers who got creative, got violent, and got free. The wolf doesn't announce itself to the sheep, and special forces operators don't stay captured, not when they have training, resolve, and the certain knowledge that rope, no matter how well tied, is still just rope. And rope breaks. Restraints fail, knots loosen, physics bends to determination and skill, but the human will, properly forged and tempered through years of impossible training, through survival in situations designed to break lesser people, through the absolute certainty that giving up is not an option, that doesn't break, that doesn't fail. That just waits for the right moment to remind everyone watching that being bound and being beaten are two very different things. And Captain Webb, sitting in his cell with dawn breaking through the barred window, finally understood the lesson he'd paid so dearly to learn. You can tie up a special forces operator. You can bind their hands and feet, secure them to a chair, put them in a locked room. But you haven't trapped them. You've just shown them what they need to escape from. And that, as he was learning in the most painful way possible, makes all the difference in the world. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring tales of courage.